forget. Okay, so let's talk about those two variables, current song and current song position. I slapped in one of those after I had the other one. I can't remember which one I had first. I think it was probably current song. And then I decided I needed the position, or vice versa. Do we need both those variables? Remember, part of the issue I said is that anytime you put variables up at the top of that file, you're stuck with the idea that you might have to initialize them, that you might have to do stuff in the toString, that you might have to write getters and setters for them, and that anytime one of them changes, now I've got to change the other one, because if that position moves, then it's a different one on the list. Right? And so there's the idea that those two variables are now tied together. When one changes, the other one has to change. And if I turn around in the next function I've got here and do it again, so we'll make play previous song, take this code, and do what play next song does, except I guess for a start it's somehow going to go backwards. Now I've still, if I change current song, I have to change that one. Okay? Oh, any place else I change current song, I have to remember to change that one. Right? So there's that idea of trying to keep them in sync all the time. Can I get rid of it? One of the variables? Current song or position?
Current song.
Probably get rid of current song. Let's just go down and see what the getter does. That's the wrong one. Go down to get current song. It just returns the current song variable like we would expect. That's the only time that the outside world really cares about it, because it's the only time it's asking. So what would be a better trick here?
Just have it position. Yeah.
Go fetch the current song out of the list whenever somebody asks for it and send it back here, right? So we'll take this code that we said, we need to worry about the current song, and we'll just move it down into here, and we'll call that a local variable instead that only this routine needs to know. So we'll retrieve whatever the current song position is, and then hopefully, if we're lucky, we should now be able to remove current song, and notice that it's saying, you're not using that variable anymore. Okay? So we'll get rid of that guy because we don't need to know. That means that we don't need to keep that thing in there for now. And it means that when we do play next song, we don't need to worry about it. Except, don't need to worry about it there either. Let's just get rid of that one. Look what's happening to the code. All that stuff is disappearing. Now we're left with back to get song here for a second, get current song. The only issue we've got is the special case of what happens if somebody calls get current song when the player first starts up. What's the current song going to be?
-1.
So that thing is, if it's a -1 in there, so that's going to die, because when you try to retrieve something from an array that's empty, it's going to say can't find it, and will just die right at that point. So Java always checks to see if it's within bounds. A -1 isn't within bounds of the array, and it dies, which is a good thing. So there's a special case here. Special case means, I guess that we should write an if statement. So we'll go in here and we'll worry about what's the problem. Worry. If for some reason the current song position happens to be nothing there, then I guess that's the point where we would say, what are we going to do here? I guess we could just get out. Return new song, and maybe something in that song object. So instead of returning null, I'm actually returning something that sort of looks like a song, because at least that title will end up being displayed someplace, hopefully. And we'll give it 0 length. Okay, so we'll craft an empty, no song really here, and send it back.
Can you just make it like say position 0 if it was -1? Or are you saying here that there was no songs to choose from?
There's no songs to choose from. There's nothing, the player hasn't reached the point where anything is going to be displayed. So we're taking this idea that you have to press the play button once before at least the current song idea comes into play. Otherwise, you don't have anything shown.
Position 0 still counts as position 1.
There are other ways to do it. I mean, conceivably, you could start up the player so that it always started playing whatever song was there from the last time, in which case you'd have the sense of current song always there. Right? But for now, this'll sort of do for us.
Do you have to do something similar for previous song?
Well, we haven't worried about what happens when you run off the end yet. So when we wrote this, right, I mean, the whole idea here is that, you know, we're assuming an infinite player here, so you just keep advancing along and there are songs, and now we get the real world running up on us. Oops, sooner or later we're going to run out of songs. So now we'll deal with the worry. What would you do if you ran out of songs? What would you expect your player to do?
Go back to the first one.
Either the two choices are either stop or wrap around and go back to the first one, right? So the unit test, I mean, would tell us, but what would be your favorite choice? The nice thing would probably be just to let it wrap around, I would think. So how do you know if you've reached the end?
Like the list?
So if the current song position, what would you say in English? If the current song position is,
Is equal to the length of the list?
well, not the length of the list, but in just pure English, if the current song is
Equal to the list.
already at the end of the list, then I would need to go back to the beginning. Okay? So if the current song is already at the end of the list, what's the end of the list? What position? Have to talk to the list, ask it how many songs are on the list. -1 is the end of the list. And again, whether or not you write it with the -1, the unit test eventually that you would write would figure out whether or not it was right or not. So it's probably -1, but not all that worried. What would you do if you reach the end? Current song position should now be at the front again. So current song position needs to be set to the 0 position, and usual thing with our if statements, we're just done at that point. That's the special case. Okay. That code looks like it sort of might possibly work. Okay. But if you're reading this code and you come along and, well, okay, let's start with you debugging this code. And you come along here and you're going, and it suddenly hits that statement, and you're expecting it to go in there and it doesn't. How are you going to be able to find out why it didn't do that if statement? Like if we're out by 1 here. Yeah, you're not going to know because you can't see the result of this calculation. Okay? So from a debugger standpoint, as you're testing out, see how it works, it's better to put a variable up there for that expression so the debugger will show you the value, and then you'll have variable against variable showing in the debugger to show you what's going on. How about another reason for putting that into a variable? Readability. What did we say it was in English? We said if the current song is already at the end of the list or the last song, then we know that we're done. And so that concept, that calculation is, where is the last song? What position is it at, right? And so from a readability standpoint, if we take this thing and we say last song position equals that calculation, then we can turn this into last song position. Assuming I spell it correctly. Okay, so now when somebody's reading the code, all of a sudden they don't even have to read that, right? They can just go, oh, okay, well, look, if the current position is the last song position, then they're setting it back to the front, okay? And if they're wondering how you got that value, they can go look there to see your calculation, okay? So they know what your intention was rather than just saying size or size minus 1, which doesn't have the same concept. So it seems like a trivial thing, but it has a whole bunch of goodness if you learn to write your code that way, right? I need the last song position. Well, let me just go calculate the last song position. Okay, now I need to do something with the last song position, check it against something. Okay, now what I'm gonna do. So this one step at a time approach, going down the page, just makes the code a lot easier to read in the long run. Okay, so it would be something along that line. So now you can sort of take that same code and you can go, okay, well, if that was play next song, then let's see if we can use almost the same thing for play previous song, just so that they sort of match up. And so now last song position is going to be 0. And maybe instead of last song position, I'm going to change it to first song position. And it helps that they look the same, and it helps that they use the same words, right? Maybe it's a little overkill. Maybe 0 means 0 here, but it doesn't hurt to keep them roughly the same.
I'm just wondering, would you want to do, like, keep the last song position and route around the opposite way?
Then current song position needs to change to, so this one, since it's only used in here, we'll do the calculation of the variable in there, and then we'll set current song position equals last song position. And now it even reads well. Okay? Now, in the old days, they would have been all hot and bothered about this, because they would have said, well, okay, knowing your assembly language now, this uses an extra register probably in order to do this calculation, and registers are expensive. We don't have very many of them. By the way, you know some of the modern machines have 128 or so odd registers, lots of them floating around. Okay, so there's a lot more registers. Compilers have gotten smarter, so compilers will come along. If you write it one step at a time, they'll go and figure out how to optimize it and make the code a lot better, and they do a better job if you actually write it out for them in a little bit more detail. Okay, so in general, this is going to be a good thing to do in modern code, and it has all of that. Human beings can look at it, they can read it better, the debugger will show you values, et cetera, et cetera. Okay? So there's a decent piece of code. Okay. How about if we do just one unit test for this thing? If I can find my little piece of code here. Remember which one is the test. Here's our test code. Let's just try testing to see whether or not it goes back to the beginning. So we'll make a test for back to the beginning. We'll steal our iPod. We'll steal a few songs. We'll add those songs. And maybe we'll do one more just so that we get 3 of them on the player. So there's a third song. We'll add them to the player. We'll get the player to play the first song, which is that one, so that it starts playing something. Now what? Now we can start to test it.
Test it's on
What song should?
song 0.
So the song that it should be playing now. So mypod dot get current song should be first song. And if we do another advance, just steal those lines. Play the next song, it should be second song. And do it one more time. Oops. Should be the third song. And finally, if we do it for the last time, it should be back to playing the first song. Okay, so notice it wasn't particularly difficult to come out with a test. You can say that to Mom, and Mom will be perfectly happy with, yeah, know exactly what that means. Now we can run the test and see whether or not it's successful. And there we go, so we know it goes back to the beginning, so I guess size -1 was the right choice. So if you wanted to be thorough, you'd add another test for, oh, does it go backwards the way it's supposed to, and all that sort of stuff. We don't have a music player that does removing of songs yet, because that gets a little weird when you remove the currently playing song. So there's a whole bunch of special cases there, but the purpose of this thing isn't necessarily to show you the special cases, it's to just show you what you can turn this thing into fairly easily. Okay, so now we've reached the point where we have presumably some sort of decent player. It remembers songs. It allows you to advance through the songs. We did some sorts of unit tests with it. We'll just pretend that it's working perfectly at this point because we wrote all those really great unit tests. Now's the time to turn around and say, why don't we put a GUI on the front of this thing just so that we can see what it looks like visually. Okay, now here's the warning about the GUI stuff. I'm going to do it in the Java GUI running locally on your machine version of the GUI, which nobody uses anymore. Okay, so about the only people that use it are Eclipse. That's about one of the few actual local Java applications I know of that people use on a regular basis. I can't think of anybody who downloads a lot of Java apps onto their machine and runs them anymore. Okay, so it's not about learning how to do local Java GUI apps, but a lot of the stuff that you're going to see is sort of the same as what you've probably been doing in the web-based stuff. And it will also give you a sense of what's common between them. Okay, so the trick here is don't get worried so much about the details. There's going to be nothing on an exam that says we're going to get you to write Java GUI code. It's just for the sense of, okay, how could I take what we've done so far and turn it into something a little bit more visual that you're used to. Okay, so let's ignore the tests. We've now got our working iPod. Let's see if I can get it down to just my iPod, and we'll figure out what we're going to do with this thing. Okay, so we're going to start writing a GUI, so let's add in a new Java class. And the GUI class this time is we're going to have a main for it, and we might as well call it whatever, music GUI. Here's our main program. Remove the useless template comments. And let's start writing a GUI. The first thing I'm going to do here, just to get it going, is I'm going to pull a little trick, a little Java trick. If I start writing a whole bunch of functions here outside of the main here, main is a special case. It's got this little keyword static on the front. And basically what it would mean is every time I wrote some little method or subroutine here, I'd have to put static on the front for various weird Java reasons. And I don't want to do that, so I'm just going to avoid it. And this is a silly little Java trick, so that you don't have to put static on the front, is we're just going to say new music GUI and call the constructor for this class, and I'm going to write the constructor right below. And I'm just going to add all of the code into the constructor is all that really happens. So main calls the constructor and the constructor does the work. And it seems sort of odd to have the constructor doing more than just building stuff, but don't worry about it. It's going to work for our purposes just to keep stuff all together. Okay, so we'll treat this as a regular class. Someplace here I'll need private void, private Daryl iPod. So I'll make my iPod variable, whatever it happens to be. I guess I can't. Oh, it's just Daryl pod. There we go again. Okay, so there's my variable, and I'm still going to initialize the thing in the constructor, which is now down here. So the pod is a new Daryl pod object. Still no GUI yet, but that's okay. Now, the issue we have when we first fire up this GUI is that it's not going to have any songs in the player, and so we're going to have this issue of how do we enter songs on the player, and conceivably you'd have to make up a, the equivalent of a GUI screen that says, oh, I've somehow loaded a song, I've got it from someplace on the network or from some device or whatever it happens to be, something that would magically pick the songs and get them onto the player, right? But I'm going to avoid the entire issue by basically faking a bunch of data to start with, okay? In the sense that I'm not all that concerned initially about how the songs get on the player. I just want there to be some songs on the player so I can start playing stuff, okay? So we're going to pull a little trick here of we're going to make a bunch of songs like we did before, and I guess I could actually steal them from the, tester. So I'll go back and grab a sample of the stuff that I used just like in the test, and we'll take all of that stuff there just so that I get some songs for the player initially. And I'm more worried about how it plays rather than anything else. Change that to my pod. Okay. So I've arbitrarily stuffed some songs onto the player, however I got them, and now the issue becomes, okay, my player is all set to go. I guess I should figure out how to display a GUI. So here's the way that you do a GUI, at least in this version of things. Now, a couple of words about what happened in Java. Originally, 20 years ago when Java came out, they had a GUI class that was called the Abstract Web Toolkit, or you see it in Java as AWT all of the time. And that class, a set of classes, it just used these variables like frame and window and stuff. Okay? They came along a little bit later and they replaced the one version of the GUI libraries with a totally different version of the GUI libraries. And so they called that all of the stuff that started with the capital J on the front was version 2 of the GUI libraries. And not only did they leave the version 1 stuff lying around, but some of the version 2 stuff still calls the version 1 stuff because it was already there. And so in general, what we're going to do is we're just going to always use the version 2 stuff, so it's always going to have that J thing on the front of it. Okay, we'll do the import statement. All of the new stuff with the J on the front of it, you'll see the word swing, so it's often referred to as the swing libraries for the GUI stuff. Okay, so that's where it all hides. For GUI, it should all be coming from there. Okay, so now we've got our new frame, and a frame is just to basically make the window, right, that's got the close box at the top and all of that sort of stuff. Okay, so it just should make the outside window. Well, okay, so there's the start of a program. Let's just run it and see what happens. It ran. Believe it or not. It says it terminated, but nothing there. Oops. Fairly typical of GUI stuff. Sometimes I just move the window just in case it came up behind, but I don't see it behind anywhere. I hit the let's just make things bigger on my screen, which wasn't a good idea. So, bottom line here, made the frame doesn't show. What can we do to make it show? Well, one of the things that you see quite often in GUIs is there will be some command that looks like set visible, and we'll try that. You're asking, why is that there? Why would they not display things to start with? I knew you were asking that question. Well, the trick is that normally when a GUI starts up, it has to make a lot of stuff. And in the old days when things were slow, when computers were slower, what would happen is you would start to see the individual pieces of the GUI coming onto the screen. So it would draw a button, and then it would draw a list, and then it would, like ding, 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 right? And so the trick that they developed was to say, well, what we'll do is we'll take all of the stuff that we would do, instead of displaying it right away, we'll basically create it and have it all set to go and all made in some sort of background buffer. And then when we say set visible, it'll go whonk and it's all there. Now, it turns out that it actually takes the same amount of time for either way. But for human perception, human beings actually think that if something splats onto the screen after a delay, that it's somehow gone faster. Okay? And I've actually used this trick in real life. I used to work for a company in Calgary where we had a site where all of the programmers worked remotely. And they attached to a mainframe. And they always used to complain, oh, well, the network is too slow, and so when I'm drawing stuff on my screen and trying to do my programming, it's just taking forever. We got hordes and hordes of complaints about it. And all that we did is we went to the terminal display beastie that basically handled all of the stuff that went to all of these terminals, and we changed one switch that said, oh, wait for all the data to come, and then display it. instead of display it as it gets there. That's all we did. And all of a sudden people raved about how much we'd speeded up the network and how things were great. Okay? So it's just a how people perceive things. Okay? The other trick that will happen with this is sometimes what they'll do graphically is while they're displaying one thing, if they've got something complicated, they'll be making it producing the next thing that you're going to see off in the background. And so then when they've got that ready, they'll just take this one out and put that one in its place. And all of a sudden it's like, wow, that was fast, right? So that's the way that they call it double buffering. So it's the way that you get basically a better frame rate out of the thing. Okay, so that's not necessarily a bad thing. So a lot of GUI guys will have that. So now we'll give it a try. We'll run it and see what happens. See anything happen? Where is it? Okay, so two things happened here. There it is hiding up there. I'm lucky it's actually this obvious. I've seen them be smaller sometimes. It's in the upper left-hand corner because that's the default place to put it instead of centered on the screen, which might or might not make more sense. And it's in the default size, which is it basically has no size, so it displayed it. It's the smallest thing that it possibly could. So if we want, we can take it and we can drag it down there so we can see it. And if we want, it actually has a, there's the frame. Okay, so nothing in it yet, but it's got the closed box and all of that sort of good stuff there. Okay, so here's another thing that often happens with GUIs is you end up playing this little fight all over the time. A lot of times is I saw that, I thought I did this, oh, I can't see it, I wonder where it disappeared to. It took me 2 times to figure out how to get the little box in the corner. It's still not the right size, it's still not in the right position, and so I'm gonna spend a whole bunch of time just trying to get the visuals right without the functionality. Okay, so at least it presents this thing. That thing will stay running. There, the program ended. By the way, that thing is sort of still not dead yet, so just for fun, I would hit the terminate button on it. Otherwise, you'll end up with many, many little silly GUIs running around. Okay. So, what do you want to do next?
Make it bigger than tiny.
Make it bigger than tiny. Okay, typically there's something that that makes it bigger. So we're going to play the game here of we won't make it visible until we've sort of got it in the right state. Okay, so we need to make it bigger. So this is talk to the frame variable, type the dot. Let's just see how many things you can say to it. Got them all? There's a few, okay? Another thing typical of, yeah, it's still spacing. Another thing typical of GUI stuff, it's not unusual to see, a 500,000 odd things that you can say to it. And I'll make a point again that of all of those 500,000 things that you can possibly say to it, there's probably only 5 or 10 that you would do in the normal case, and the other ones are all sort of specialized stuff for, doing some fancy things. Okay? And so we're just going to concentrate on doing some of the normal stuff. So we'll work with it from there. Let's just try, that it's got to probably be a set. So, oh sure, there's a whole bunch in there. There's set cursor, set default, set. And so sometimes one of the ways to play with this, if you don't care to actually read the documentation, is go, oh look, there's 2 versions of set size. Okay, I wonder if one of them works. The difference between the two is that version of set size takes a width and a height, and a dimension variable is actually just a class with a width and a height buried into it.
What's the difference between set size and set bounds?
I don't know. No, there's a difference, but again, at this point, I don't really care. You know, there's, like I said, there's a billion of these things. And notice there's also set preferred size. Set preferred size is used a little different. That's when it's trying to cram a bunch of stuff onto the screen, and it's trying to figure out if I'm going to get all these different pieces on the screen. They all have different preferred sizes, and let's see if I can manipulate them somehow to fit it on the screen. So I don't know what a dimension is, but what the heck, I'm going to not use dimension, and I'm just going to try a width and a height. And rather than making them the same, I'm going to make them a little different, just because when they do actually display, maybe I can figure out what width means and what height means. So I don't even have to know. I'll just go give it a try. Save that thing. Run it. Oh, look. Now at least we can see it. Okay, so a good lesson for the GUI sort of stuff is that you probably have to give things a size if you expect them to somehow magically be able to display. So not just the frame, but other stuff probably has to have a size too, otherwise you might not see it. Okay, I'm getting tired of dragging this thing to the center of the screen all the time where we can see it, so it would be nice if we could sort of see it all the time as we're working with it. I seem to have an obsession with the middle of the screen. So now you have to try to find something that moves it to the center. Oh, could be what? Move. But then you'd need to give it an X and Y coordinate to get it to move, which means I would have to be able to somehow talk to the screen and say, how big are you, so that I could figure out what the width of the screen was and do the math to figure out where the center is and where the thing needs to, the center of my dialog box needs to be centered on the screen. Too much work. It would be nice if they provided something where you just said, move to center. Well, in this version of things, they don't actually provide that. But what they do provide, and this is one where documentation helps, there's a set location, and there's a set location relative to, which says set it relative to who knows what. And it takes this weird component thing, and I don't know what a component is, but oh, look at the documentation there. It says, oh, if component is null, the window is placed in the center of the screen. Okay. Now, this thing, when I initially looked for it, took me about a day to find, browsing through the documentation, because it's not obvious that set location with a null in it should do that, and eventually you just find one of these things, and so magically that does it. So this is one of the ones where the API, the people who developed all of these things, to, you know, the API to talk to the frame, it would have been nice if they would have just had center, frame.center, and let it even hide the set relative location to null thing inside of it, and then I wouldn't have to know, but that will get it centered on the screen. So the GUI people in particular never seem to be nice to you in terms of some of the APIs they give you. So we'll run the thing, and now it's centered on my screen, not necessarily on what I'm showing you. Believe it or not, that's the center of my screen. Okay, so still nothing in it. Okay, so notice I'm doing one small step at a time. Oh, this is wrong, let me go fix it. Okay, this is wrong, let me go fix it. One step at a time, not worrying too much about what I got. What do you want to do next?
Well, it's still running.
Yeah, I'll kill these off. End up with way too many of them. It would be nice to put any old thing onto the screen just to see whether or not you can get anything on the screen. So sure, let's try that. Probably the easiest thing to put on are buttons. So let's just make a button, not because we'll necessarily need one right away, but just because why not? So instead of button, I need to say JButton. We'll call it anything. Start button. Now, I tend to use the same word as the thing I made, on the name of my variable, because if you just leave it as start, you're gonna wonder, is that a button, is that a piece of text, what is it? And so it's one of the few cases where I actually repeat the kind of thing it is in the name, just so that when I see it later, it's a lot easier to see. So we'll make a new J button. What do you think a button might take as parameters? Even if you've never seen one before.
Label.
Label normally shows up on a button, so we'll just put something on the button. Hey. And again, do the import statement. So made the button. Just run it and see what happens, because that's what people normally do. Oh, I know. No button. So made the button, but it doesn't show up. Oops. The reason it doesn't show up is because after you've made the button, you have to turn around and say, okay, that button needs to be added onto the frame, so dump it into the frame. So if you think of a list that we've made so far as collecting things like students to hold on to, you can think of a frame as being something that collects visual things to hold on to, so that eventually it can decide how it's going to draw them and make them show up. It's holding on to all of those bits and pieces of the visual stuff. Okay, so that's why it sort of looks similar to a list. You just add stuff onto it. You can remove stuff from it. Right, so they're fairly consistent in that. We'll save that. And we'll run it. Hey. Notice it changed to a lovely blue. Yeah, okay. So this is, since this button has no size, it turned around and said, well, I don't know what else to do, so I'll make the button fill basically the whole screen. Okay, and it's not hooked up to click yet, so it doesn't actually do anything, but at least you got a button there. Okay, now there's a couple of things we could do for size, but maybe we'll leave that for a minute now that we got the hey going. Well, no, maybe we could change the size. Let's just give that a try. So we'll try set, see if there's a set size. Oh, look, there's a set size for that thing too. So it looks like almost all the visual elements have a set size. So let's try, oh, whatever, 30 by maybe 15. And see what happens with that. Hey. So set size didn't do anything. Oh. Let's try one other thing here. Talk about layout managers. Do you guys do those in? No. Notice that one's Java AWT really quickly. So flow layout's been around for a while. You guys do layout managers in the web-based stuff? Oh, okay. Well, here's what a layout manager does. A layout manager just tells you the default order that it's going to try to place things on the screen. So there's a layout manager that says I'm always going to place things top to bottom, left to right, which is what flow layout does. So as you add things on to this particular frame, as you put more things on, it's just going to try to fit them all in and do them top to bottom, left to right. There's other ones, there's a grid layout that you can make that says treat this thing as a grid, and then when you position a button you can say I always want it to appear here on the screen in this particular way. So for instance, dialog boxes that like to have a particular format of where things are placed and they stick to the format no matter what the size, will have a grid layout to say, no, I always want it to be exactly like this. The flow layout ones are the ones where if you grab a corner and you adjust the screen, then all of a sudden things move around on the screen to try to, the items will actually position themselves to try to fit into whatever the bounds are of what you've got. Okay, so flow layout is probably the easiest one to work with just because you can see most of the stuff that gets created. So I'm going to put that one in there, and that will help us when we're doing more elements. And conveniently, also helps us to say, flow layout is now saying, since I don't want these things occupying the full size of the screen, it's probably going to be more elements added. I'll put it down to some more natural size like you would expect. So flow layout here is actually honoring the size thing and saying, oh, okay, I guess now that there is a layout, you don't want to fill the whole screen, which was the default. We'll start placing things top to bottom, left to right in their appropriate size. Okay? And so now we can position buttons on the screen having done all that. Eventually we might change this layout to something else, but this will just be more convenient for now. Okay? And with that, we've got a hey button that doesn't do anything and no GUI player, but that's a good place to stop. Hey.